Tensions in the Middle East have been sky high since late 2023. But let's imagine something. Let's jump forward to 2026, where a U.S. and Israeli attack on Iran spirals into a full-on war with, well, earth-shattering consequences. That's exactly what we're going to do here. Dive into that very scenario to ask a really thorny question. In a war today, what does winning even look like?
So let's just jump right in. Before we even talk about a single missile or troop movement, we have to wrestle with this, right? What is a win? Does it mean you smashed their army or, toppled their government? Or is it something else entirely? Just keep that question in your back pocket as we go through this.
Okay, so let's set the stage for this whole hypothetical conflict. The stated goal for the U.S. and Israel was pretty simple and pretty ambitious: regime change in Tehran. But how in the world did we get to that point? Well, it all kicks off in mid-2025, with a major attack meant to seriously cripple Iran. By early 2026, huge protests inside Iran get violently shut down by the regime, leaving thousands dead. In response, U.S. President Trump makes a promise. Help is on the way. And by the end of February, the war begins for real, with two massive air campaigns, Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion.
Now, the first move in this war, it wasn't some slow, careful chess game. Nope, it was a sledgehammer. A sudden, totally overwhelming attack aimed right for the head. And those first airstrikes were, wow, they were unbelievably effective. Within the very first day, President Trump announced that 40 of Iran's top political and military leaders were gone, eliminated. Just let that number sink in. That's not a statistic. That's wiping out an entire generation of leadership in a single, massive blow. And look, we are not talking about some mid-level managers here. This was the absolute top of the pyramid, the supreme leader himself, the commander of the super powerful IRGC, the defense minister. I mean, the list just goes on. On paper, this was it. Iran was headless on day one. But, and this is a huge but, this is where the whole idea of an easy win just completely unravels. Even with its entire senior command wiped out, Iran's response was almost immediate. We're talking hours later, missiles and drones are in the air. See, this wasn't a fluke. It was the plan all along. Iran's military was designed for this, expecting this kind of attack. It's built on a decentralized command, meaning local commanders don't need to wait for orders from the top. So yeah, the head was gone, but the body was still fighting. So with its leadership in chaos and its regular military getting hammered, Iran had to switch gears. Fast. It knew it couldn't win a straight-up fight. So it did something else. It decided to go to war with the entire global economy. And what's so fascinating here is you see two completely different ways of fighting on display. On one hand, you've got the US and Israel with their advanced, super expensive, centralized military machine. And on the other, Iran leans hard into what we call asymmetric warfare. Think cheap, disposable drones, simple naval mines, and proxy militias. All designed to cause the most chaos for the least amount of cost. And the new battlefield, it wasn't a desert or a city, it was the Strait of Hormuz. This little waterway is, and I'm not exaggerating, one of the most important strategic locations on the planet. Why? Because a massive chunk of the world's energy supply has to squeeze through this one tiny choke point. And this really drives the point home. Look at this. A full 20%, 1/5 of all oil that travels by sea goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So when Iran announced that it was closed for business, they were basically putting a knife to the world's economic throat. The effect? It was instantaneous, and it was catastrophic. The price of oil pretty much doubled overnight, jumping from $65 a barrel to over $120. And this wasn't just some regional problem. This sent shockwaves everywhere, causing gas and energy prices to just explode around the globe. And here's the kicker. America was pretty much on its own. When the Trump administration went to its NATO allies and asked for help reopening the strait, the answer was a hard no. The U.S. was left to deal with a global economic crisis that, from their allies' perspective, it had started. Okay, so the fighting is raging, the world economy is in a panic. Let's take a breath. Let's step back and actually grade this thing. Let's look at the results and measure them against what the U.S. and Israel said they wanted to do in the first place. They went in with a 3-point checklist. Number 1, and this was the big one, regime change. Number 2, completely get rid of Iran's nuclear program. And number 3, make sure Iran is no longer a military threat to anybody in the region. So, let's score them. All right, first up, the main event, regime change. Even after that massive decapitation strike that killed the supreme leader, the final verdict on this primary goal is nope, didn't happen. So why? How did the regime manage to hang on? Well, there are a few key reasons. First, you can kill leaders, but you can't kill an ideology or the massive government system that keeps a country running. Second, that big popular uprising that the strikes were supposed to help trigger, it never came. In fact, the attacks might have actually made Iranians rally around their flag. And finally, that IRGC proved to be incredibly tough, not just because it's decentralized, but because it's way more than an army. It's woven into Iran's entire economy and society. It adapted. And with Iran's brutal mountains and deserts, any idea of a ground invasion to finish the job was just not happening. Okay, goal number 2 on the list, getting rid of Iran's nuclear program. For good. And here again, the verdict is a pretty clear failure. You see, even though the strikes did some damage to their facilities, Iran likely still had enough enriched uranium for about 10 bombs. But more importantly, it still had the knowledge, the scientists, the engineers to just rebuild everything. And unless you put boots on the ground to go into every single one of those deep underground bunkers, you can never be 100% sure you got it all. And that brings us to the last box on the scorecard, neutralizing Iran's military. And on this one, the answer is, well, it's complicated. It wasn't a total failure, but it definitely wasn't a home run either. This table lays it out perfectly. Look, Iran's conventional military, its air defense systems, its ships, its bases, was absolutely wrecked. And a traditional war, you'd call that a defeat. But its asymmetric power, those cheap drones, the missiles, the proxy armies causing chaos all over the region, that was still a very, very real threat. So, after all that, where are we? The United States and Israel brought down the thunder with unbelievable military power. And yet, they ended up stuck in this strategic trap. There's a term for this. It's called a Pyrrhic victory. It's basically a win that costs you so much, you might as well have lost. And this whole scenario just puts a giant spotlight on warfare in the 21st century. Sure, Iran's infrastructure was in ruins, but the regime was still there. But the nuclear threat was still on the table. America's allies in the Gulf were still getting hit, and the global economy was still being held hostage. On every major strategic goal, the campaign failed. It proved that just having the biggest bombs doesn't guarantee you actually win. Which throws us right back to the question we started with. This whole thing forces us to look at how war itself is changing. Maybe the era of big, clean, decisive victories is over. When a country with less advanced tech can survive a direct hit to its leadership and turn the global economy into a weapon, it raises a really tough question for any superpower. If you can blow up all of your enemy's stuff, but you don't actually achieve any of your goals, did you really win? Or did you just learn that the old rules of war don't apply anymore?